But Brandon, let's move on into our final topic before we get into the picks. And we're going to be looking at Iowa State. This is a team that in 2 straight games has beaten not 2 straight games. They've had 2 in between. They beat Oklahoma. They've been on a 4-game win streak, beating TCU, the number 4 team in the country, this past week, 14-7. This is a team that ever since starting their quarterback of Kyle Kempt in the Oklahoma game, 4-0 Kempt has been the senior as the starter for Iowa State. I'm going to be plain and simple when I ask you this question. Will the Cyclones win the Big 12? Right now they're on top. Right now they're in a 4-way tie with TCU, Oklahoma, and Oklahoma State, and the Cyclones technically have the tiebreaker if you're looking at ESPN.
I'm going to say no, they don't. They've been great, and it's been a great run that we've been able to see with them. But I feel like there is somebody within the 3 teams right underneath them that's going to get it. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people, I think, would say TCU is the most likely candidate to be able to do that. However, with them just losing to Iowa State, that could be interesting. But then you have Oklahoma again. You've got Oklahoma State. You have Oklahoma State who, if, let's say, they don't lose to anybody else and then they beat Iowa State, could have them up there at the top. Again, I'm not trying to be an Iowa State hater. I love what Iowa State has been doing. I just don't necessarily know if it's going to all work out for them to be able to win. I don't think it will. I personally want to see Oklahoma State be able to win it, but it's more realistic that TCU would right now. I mean, that's your opinion. Let me throw it right back on you, Ricky. Give your thought.
Really, it goes off the schedule because really it's a 2-part question because of the Big 12 title game coming back this year. I look at the remaining schedules, and I said in our first segment that I believe TCU has I don't want to say easiest. They have, to me, looking down the schedule, the best chance to go undefeated in their next few games, with Oklahoma being the only ranked opponent they play. However, like you brought up, Texas Tech and Texas could be tough opponents for TCU. You look at Oklahoma, they got to play Oklahoma State, they got to play TCU, they got 2 ranked opponents on the schedule. And then you look at Oklahoma State, they have to go through Oklahoma, they have to go through Iowa State, whereas Iowa State, they have to go through, yes, West Virginia. However, with West Virginia coming off of the loss to the Cowboys, are they the team that we saw earlier in the year? And then really...
West Virginia, I just want to stop you right there really quickly. West Virginia looked really, really good at a couple of points in that game on Saturday. Oklahoma State showed that they're just that much better. Yeah. We're able to pull away. But this West Virginia team is very, very... I'm trying to think of the right word. They're tricky. They're tricky.
Dark horses.
They're tricky to figure out because there's one week where they come out and it's like, wow, they played really, really well. One week they come out and you go, what were they doing?
Well, and
so it doesn't. It's not like your typical team where you lose one there but you win all your other ones. They're just kind of that team, even within games, like we saw this past weekend, looking really, really good, making some really good defensive stops, turnovers, all this stuff, and then whoom, Oklahoma State goes flying right past them. So West Virginia is a tricky team, and they'll be playing. Iowa State will be playing on the road.
The thing, though, that's interesting about Iowa State, and although West Virginia, Oklahoma State, and Kansas State, I look at those 3 teams and I go, 2 are on the road, and then you have the ranked one at home. You could lose all 3 of those games. Not saying you're going to. The thing, though, that makes me look like, ooh, they have a chance, and I know one of the teams was Kansas that they shut out, but in their last 3 games, defense hasn't allowed more than 13 points in a game. Texas Tech was the most in the last 3, and they scored 13. TCU, a team that I thought was going to be a undefeated team in our college football playoff rankings in the top 4, they lose. They only score 7 points in that game. So the Cyclones, to me, I feel like 2 things need to go well. The defense needs to continue to keep points off the board, and also you have to have Kyle Kempt playing well under center for this team. The quarterback needs to be well. They need to put points up. they're not going to be able to win the rest of their games 14-7 like they did against TCU. They're going to have to put points up. Right now, if I had to put my money on it, I am probably going to go with TCU and Oklahoma being in the Big Ten title game. And then probably Oklahoma winning the Big 12. Basically, I'm looking at it for the TCU. If they lose to Oklahoma, yes, Oklahoma and Oklahoma State would be ahead of them. But if Oklahoma beats Oklahoma State, then we're back to the tiebreaker with TCU, where TCU would have that over Oklahoma State, I do believe. Or no, they would. Yeah, they would, because they beat Oklahoma State earlier in the year. Iowa State, I just don't think, out of the three I mentioned, West Virginia, Oklahoma State, and Kansas State, I think they lose two of those games. I think they lose two of them, maybe lose to Oklahoma State. Then it's like, oh, you know what, we're out of it, and then Kansas State gets the better of them. Or they could lose the next two against West Virginia and against Oklahoma State. I just don't think they have enough to keep this going. And I would love them to keep it going, because I want to see a new face, especially with the Big 12. I want to see a new face in there, especially with how optimistic you and I were in our Iowa State preview. There were a lot of fans that were like, guys, I think you're a little bit too optimistic on this Cyclone team. I just don't know if they have enough to get through this schedule, although it seems like they are the one team that, hey, we're in the driver's seat. They beat Oklahoma State. The next three teams below them, like we've been talking about, TCU, Oklahoma, and Oklahoma State, would have all lost to Iowa State.
Yeah, they would have. So it's getting really interesting down here, down the stretch, especially because we've got all these teams kind of playing each other. We're going to find out really, really quickly who's going to be able to make it and who's going to be quickly fading out, especially since they all have at least one loss, and all of them at least one loss in the conference. So that's what's going to be the most interesting when we get here in the next couple of weeks. I like, again, Oklahoma State. I like their offense. I like Mason Rudolph. I think he's been absolutely phenomenal this year, even with
You've been high on them all year.
Absolutely, but I have been. This offense has been very, very good. It's always going to keep your team in a game. They've been impressive. Baker Mayfield, he's been good. Oklahoma's been good, but we've seen them when their defense has been very, very good. We've seen them when their defense has not been good at all in that game against Iowa State. Iowa State's offense was great. They did a really good job. Their defense was good. But on the other side for Oklahoma, completely stunned when that could not happen. TCU, we've talked about them multiple times as they have the best defense here in the Big 12. Well, Iowa State's made a really good case for that in the last couple of weeks, that they may have one of the best defenses here in the Big 12. So we clearly know it's going to be these four teams. And it's tough. I know we sit here and we try and act like we know what's going to happen. We don't have a freaking clue. But
come on. None of us thought that Notre Dame would even be in the playoffs, and look at them. After last season, no one thought that. So, we don't know what's going on. We're just trying to give our best thought of what we think may happen.
No, I know.
Trying to play a little Nostradamus here, Brandon.
No, I know, but I'm just coming out and saying because there's always going to be people that
you don't know what you're talking about.
Never proclaimed that we knew exactly what was going to happen, but it's that's why it's fun. That's why it's college football. But I really do think I have the faith in Oklahoma State. I said it before. Oklahoma State's going to be having a very, very big couple of weeks coming up, with the biggest coming up this weekend against Oklahoma at home. That is going to be a big game. I think Oklahoma State will. I'll wait till later to say that. But I'm just saying, ultimately, Oklahoma State is the team I think that's going to be winning this Big 12. Not Iowa State. They've made a good run. They've made a good name for themselves, but they're not going to be winning it.
Let me ask you this. What if the Cyclones win the Big 12? If they win the Big 12 and win every single game doing it, How close do they get to the playoff?
Close.
How close?
6.
Are they going to be first in, second out?
6.
You think they'll be the second team out?
Team. I mean, if you realistically look where they are right now, they're 4-1 in their conference. They're 6-2 overall. So they have 2 overall losses. They don't lose again. They win on the road at West Virginia, home against Oklahoma State, on the road Baylor, on the road K-State, and you win the Big 12,
which they would probably have to beat either Oklahoma or TCU at that point.
Yeah, I mean Alabama and Georgia. Are 2 that are, I would say, are locked in right now.
Even though they'll play each other probably in the SEC title
They're
game.
locked in right now.
Okay.
Doesn't change anything for me. Notre Dame is looking really good right now with their position where they could be at. Ohio State, I don't see them losing again necessarily. We'll see. Penn State's right there. Yeah, I mean, Iowa State would certainly make a very nice case for themselves, but I don't think that they would make it.
And the thing that I am just thinking about in my head is, you know what this season kind of reminds me of the rankings and where we're at right now is this reminds me of 2011. The main reason why, do you remember who finished 1-2 at the end of that season? They were both in the same conference, both in the SEC.
No.
Alabama, LSU. That was the year where we had the Alabama LSU national championship game. I kind of feel like that. Even though, let's say the Cyclones win the Big 12, I feel like because of that fact, because we are headed down that road, I believe I'm with you. If these two teams play, because even earlier on in that one, Alabama played LSU. It was a 9-6 game in overtime. 9-6 is what Alabama did, and they lost. And then they eventually rolled over the Tigers in the national title game to win that national championship. I think because we're headed that way, even if the Cyclones did win the Big 12 from the Oklahoma, from TCU, from Oklahoma State, it would be mighty hard for them to make the playoffs. Mainly because also the 2 losses that you mentioned, how are you grading a 3-point overtime loss to Iowa, who was an unranked team, and you played them at home? I know that's a rivalry game, and like I said, that game was going to be close. But then you also lose by 10 points to Texas. And I know what Cyclone fans are going to say. They're going to say, well, Ricky, those are 2 close games. You got to at least give us credit for that. But do you think a committee, or if you were on the committee, would you look at those losses favorably because they were 10-3? They were close losses, and they didn't get blown out like 45-0 like they beat Kansas.
Yeah, I think that you do have to look at something like that, but I'm going on the theme tonight throughout all these videos that we're doing is what I talked about in the first one when we were talking about
trying to stay consistent, as Brandon.
Oh, I was just gonna say when I was talking about Kirk Herbstreit and the whole eye test.
Yep.
You know, what do they look like? We know how what this team was like. They may have, these 2 losses. They may have this 1 loss, but what we saw them with our eyes, what they were throughout the season. They didn't change in this 1 game.
Yeah.
This is how they looked. So I think that that's ultimately where I'd kind of be at in terms of looking at a team.
And I totally agree with that. And the reason why I agree with that is basically you got to look at what they have been since they made the quarterback change. Jacob Park was the quarterback for the first 4. They go 2-2. Ever since putting Kyle Kemp, the senior, at quarterback, 3 touchdowns, no INTs against Oklahoma. Only 1 touchdown, no INTs against Kansas. 3-1 against Texas Tech. 2-1 against TCU. This kid has been the reason, I'm going to say the reason, this team is winning. ever since they've made him the starter, they've won every single game. That is why. There are a different team post-Kempt, after Kempt, well, during Kempt is what I should say. Then, and you look at that Iowa-Texas game, that was the pre-Ohio State, or Iowa State team, not the Iowa State team we're looking at right now with Kyle Kempt. Any final thoughts you have on Iowa State or the Big 12 as a whole before I kick it to the viewers?
Well, I would say
and listeners.
I would say the Big 12, what they've done this year, and I've given them plenty of flack in years past for it being just another mopey-dopey kind of, Power 5 conference.
No, it's the Pac-12 this year.
Well, it's certainly the Pac-12 this year. There's no doubt about that one. Not even awake for those games. But I think that with the Big 12, what they've done is they've really put themselves, I think, back on the map in terms of we can play some defense. We can be pretty competitive outside of just our offenses, and we can be competitive just outside of Oklahoma and Oklahoma State. And then there's GCU coming on. Then I shouldn't say coming back, and then Iowa State, coming on. So those are some great things to see, and I don't want to throw out West Virginia either. They've also been a pretty good team at points this season. I'm excited about where the Big 12's headed. Hopefully that this is not just a fluke, not just a good season, that it's something of things to come, and I think it is.
Well, this is where I want to turn the conversation on to you guys. What do you think of the Cyclones? Will they win the Big 12? And kind of overall, how do you see the rest of the Big 12 playing as we get closer and closer to the end of the regular season? Let us know what you guys think down below in the comment section.